We have absolutely no clue if the genetic material swabbed from Luke Daly while he was in custody has been checked against the trace evidence found on that glove, even though his lawyer openly admitted they took those biological samples. The authorities are keeping extremely tight-lipped and have not shared any lab results. On top of that, we have zero idea if tearing through his property actually turned up any smoking guns, tying him straight to Nancy Guthrie going missing. The local sheriff did admit they hauled away some items of interest, but he is keeping exactly what they bagged strictly under wraps. It is also totally unclear if Luke Daly actually fits the profile of the shady figure caught on that Ring camera, who is described as roughly 5'9" to 5'10", sporting an average frame and rocking what looked like a dark mustache peeking out from under a face cover. Nobody has actually formally released his exact height and weight profile to the general public just yet. We are entirely in the dark about whether there is an established link between Daly, Kayla Noel Day, and some massive crime ring that the feds are watching. And most importantly, we are still completely clueless on Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts. For all we know, Luke Daly could be entirely innocent in this whole nightmare. His legal counsel is screaming that from the rooftops, but the local sheriff, who made a massive point of standing in front of the press to deliberately absolve every single Guthrie relative by name, notably withheld that exact same courtesy from Luke Daly. When you are reading between the lines of the ultra-cautious, calculated jargon of an ongoing federal probe, keeping your mouth shut absolutely screams volumes. If you or anyone you know is holding on to any clues regarding Nancy Guthrie vanishing, do the right thing and dial the Pima County Sheriff's Office at 520-351-4900 or just hit up the federal tip hotline. There is currently a massive bounty of over $200,000 sitting on the table for any solid leads that actually bring her home safe and sound. I am going to stay firmly on top of this story and bring you all the latest breaks as they happen. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you are completely looped in for the very next update. The clock strikes 9:15 on Friday night, February 13th, settling over the Catalina Foothills just north of Tucson, where luxurious estates sit nestled in the silent desert landscape. A highly irregular situation is unfolding. You will not see blazing sirens or hear blaring megaphones. Only quiet federal operatives alongside local deputies executing a pair of judge-approved search orders that took several days to secure. Waiting indoors are a 37-year-old male and his 77-year-old mother, both of whom are about to be escorted off the premises. Law enforcement took both individuals into custody, making it clear this was no accidental visit or some anonymous tip line lead. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos personally confirmed that this raid stemmed directly from an intense, laser-focused observation operation. Detectives kept close tabs on this suspect long before showing up with legal paperwork, keeping his name entirely out of the press for 5 full days. A defense lawyer finally revealed the suspect's identity on February 18th, launching our deep dive into his background, the reasons authorities targeted him, and the lingering questions surrounding the raid. Despite his legal counsel fiercely denying any involvement in the crime, the local sheriff continually refuses to clear the man's name. Part 1, diving into the identity of Nancy Guthrie and breaking down the facts for anyone just joining this ongoing investigation. Even veteran followers should review the established evidence, since these specific clues hold incredible weight, starting with the fact that Nancy Guthrie is 84 years of age. As the parent of veteran NBC Today Show host Savannah Guthrie, she resides by herself in the upscale Catalina Foothills community near Tucson. This particular slice of Arizona represents a peaceful, wealthy enclave resting right at the base of the beautiful Santa Catalina mountain range. Relatives dropped her off following a meal on the evening of January 31st, 2026, with cameras showing her garage shutting at 9:50 before abruptly cutting out at 1:47 in the morning. Missing her regular Sunday morning church service served as the initial red flag that a tragedy had occurred. The evidence left behind in her residence eliminated the possibility of an accidental slip or a sudden health crisis, leaving authorities with only one chilling conclusion. Someone had abducted her, prompting federal agents to share security tape of a disguised figure creeping up to Nancy's property early on February 1st. Authorities described the presumed perpetrator as having an average frame, standing roughly 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, and sporting dark hand coverings alongside a blacked out face shield and knapsack. Detectives recognized the bag as a 25-liter Ozark Trail brand, which consumers can only purchase through Walmart stores. The video clearly shows the intruder messing with the front door lens, proving the system failure at 1:47 in the morning was an intentional act of sabotage rather than an electrical glitch. News stations have collected roughly 4 separate extortion letters, though federal agents already nabbed a fraudster responsible for sending one of those fake demands. A different message asked for $6 million in cryptocurrency, establishing a strict payment window closing at 5 in the evening on February 9th. Someone actually transferred a minor crypto payment of about $152 into the specified digital account. Police refused to state if that monetary deposit links back to the perpetrators, while the victim's loved ones openly declared their readiness to hand over the cash. Relatives simply want evidence she remains alive, pushing the public to submit over 40,000 leads to the authorities. Even with a massive task force of 300 officers and a bounty topping $200,000, the missing grandmother remains entirely unaccounted for. However, a single tangible clue has suddenly emerged as the undisputed focal point of this massive manhunt. Searchers stumbled upon a set of dark hand coverings discarded roughly 2 miles away from the victim's residence. Federal agents and the Pima County Sheriff verified the discovery of genetic material from a male suspect on the fabric, immediately running that biological profile through the National CODIS network. Finding a successful match in that federal registry would instantly link the evidence to a known criminal offender or a previous crime scene sample. Up to this point, detectives admit the database came up empty, pushing them to launch a complex genetic genealogy sweep instead. This advanced scientific method holds immense potential for tracking down a suspect through their family members' genetic profiles, so make sure you remember this crucial detail. We plan to circle back to that shortly, but first we must explore Act 2, the chilling 1988 mystery of Annie Laurie Harren. Skipping past Luke Daly for a moment, let me introduce a different victim named Annie Laurie Harren, whose terrifying ordeal remains relatively unknown. I highly suggest you listen closely to her story, because by the time this presentation wraps up, everything will connect. The parallels are so striking that you will forever link her memory with Nancy Guthrie, taking us all the way back to 1988 in Jackson, Mississippi. The 72-year-old matriarch carried massive influence as a high society figurehead and the reigning president of the local opera guild. She heavily supported cultural events while serving as the Arts Festival co-chair, all alongside her incredibly affluent husband. Robert Harren commanded a personal fortune easily exceeding $100 million through his partnership in the Regional Natural Gas Corporation. His financial reach included massive shares in the state's second biggest banking institution, providing a lavish lifestyle for his deeply cherished aging wife. Her physical health remained quite fragile due to severe arthritis, spine curvature, and a painful bowel disease requiring a strict daily regimen of steroids. Missing even a few doses of those essential prescriptions would rapidly put her survival in absolute jeopardy. The wealthy socialite welcomed friends over for their regular card game on July 26, 1988, hosting everyone at her lavish 139 Woodland Drive estate. Her final visitor headed out the door right around 2:30 that afternoon, followed shortly by the maid clocking out at 3 o'clock sharp. Robert, her spouse, arrived back at the house around 4:30 in the afternoon. Seeing her vehicle parked outside, he figured she was probably catching up with a buddy somewhere. However, the clock struck 7:30 that evening, and there was still no sign of her. He quickly dialed their daughter to see if she knew anything. Shortly after, his son-in-law drove over so they could look around the property together. The horrifying discovery they stumbled upon left them completely frozen in terror. They spotted drops of Annie Laurie's blood scattered across the entryway rug, with disturbing crimson streaks violently wiped across the surface of the main entrance. Detectives pieced together that an attacker likely ambushed and hit her while she was waiting right at the threshold, leaving a chilling extortion letter lying right there on the foyer floor. That sinister message explicitly warned Robert Hine to keep the cops entirely out of the picture. Furthermore, It detailed exactly 12 guys, a dozen businessmen whom Robert supposedly screwed over during past corporate dealings. The blackmailer insisted that every single one of those guys receive a hefty payout. One particular individual highlighted on that strange roster happened to be Newton Alfred Wynn, a lawyer based down in Florida. This kicked off an incredibly wild sequence of events that would eventually go down as an absolutely crazy, unprecedented abduction saga in United States history. Local news outlets out in Jackson agreed to keep things quiet for a solid 24 hours so the detectives could do their jobs without tipping off the bad guys. Federal agents from the FBI were brought into the fold right away, leaving the entire community anxious and waiting. A full 3 weeks after Annie Laurie disappeared, an envelope stamped out of Atlanta, Georgia, finally showed up in the mail. The penmanship perfectly matched her distinct writing style. The terrifying message read, "Bob, unless you follow their demands exactly, my captors plan to lock me away in a dark basement with nothing but a couple gallons of water, so please come rescue me." Signed by Annie Laurie. Within 24 hours, a desperate Robert Harren sent off close to $1 million in extortion cash, carefully splitting the funds between those 12 specific guys mentioned in the initial threat. Newton Alfred Wynn ended up sending his share of the cash right back to the family. The guy insisted he was completely clueless about the whole abduction nightmare. He even stood up in front of a federal grand jury, swearing up and down that he played absolutely no part in the crime. However, the federal agents kept a very close eye on his every move. A massive probe slowly came together over several long months. Eventually, Wynn's legal assistant flipped and helped the authorities, while an ex-partner also took the stand to share what she knew. Detectives pieced together what looked like an incredibly long, drawn-out vengeance plot. It turns out Wynn previously suffered a massive defeat in a lawsuit over a student photography business heavily tied to the massive Harren corporate network. A judge previously hammered the bitter lawyer with a massive penalty of more than $153 grand in a brutal legal ruling roughly 4 years prior to the actual abduction. The feds strongly suspected he used every single bit of those 4 years meticulously plotting his dark retaliation. Fast forward to 1990, and the jury finally found Newton Alfred Wynn guilty on all fronts. They nailed him for teaming up to pull off an abduction, blackmailing a family, and lying under oath. The judge handed him a hefty 19-year and 7-month sentence behind federal bar. He eventually walked free in 2006 and passed away in 2012, taking his dark secrets to the grave without a single confession. Tragically, nobody ever located Annie Laurie Harren after that fateful day. Robert Harren, her devastated spouse, suffered a fatal cardiac event in November 1990, passing away without ever getting any closure about his beloved partner's tragic fate. The court system officially recognized Annie Laurie as deceased in 1991. Detectives are pretty confident she perished during those initial 30 days of captivity, presumably locked away somewhere on a secluded Florida estate. To this day, search teams haven't unearthed a single trace of her body. Now, don't get me wrong, I certainly don't think Nancy Guthrie's situation is destined for the exact same tragic conclusion. I'm definitely not trying to say these two separate mysteries are perfectly identical either. My main point here is simply this: that old Annie Laurie Harren snatching basically laid out a criminal blueprint that cops have been intensely analyzing for almost 40 long years. You've got an older lady belonging to a well-known family living in a super wealthy part of town who suddenly gets ripped right out of her own house. The massive extortion demands force the detectives to tread incredibly lightly, meticulously working the angle back in the old days, way before fancy DNA databases and modern ancestry tracing even existed. Unlike that past mystery, the team handling Nancy Guthrie's disappearance gets to use an absolute arsenal of cutting-edge tech that the old-school detectives could only dream about. We're talking advanced genetic tracking, smart porch cameras capturing everything, massive online networks, plus a dedicated hotline boasting a massive $200,000 bounty that already pulled in over 40,000 leads. However, if you strip it all down to the bare bones, an aging grandmother snatched right from her cozy residence, a disguised intruder screaming for cash, and precious time rapidly slipping away, well, none of that terrifying stuff has really changed. Furthermore, looking back at that historical Annie Laurie Harren tragedy, the guilty dude actually harbored a deep, long-standing money grudge against her wealthy relatives. This monster wasn't just some stranger passing through the neighborhood. The guy harbored a massive vendetta. Now, moving on to the third act, focusing on the big raid, let's break down exactly what went down on February 13th. We really need to rewind the clock back to February 13th and thoroughly unpack the gritty details of that operation, especially since folks are so quick to just skim a flashy news banner, see that some guy got cuffed, and then let go, and then completely brush the whole thing off. Honestly, once you dive deep into the crazy logistics behind how this sting was orchestrated, shrugging it off becomes nearly impossible. Everything kicks off with a solid tip. Sheriff Nanos actually broke down their entire workflow for the press recently, and his explanation is definitely worth paying attention to. He pointed out that right now, his investigators are drowning in a sea of information, juggling something like 30,000 or maybe even 40,000 different tips. But whatever the crazy total is, these cops are partnering up and relentlessly hunting down every single clue, whether that means rushing over to a massive Walmart, checking out a local firearms dealer, or following up on some random genetic profile, because they just have to run everything into the ground until they finally hit that crucial moment where they pause and realize, holy cow, this specific detail is genuinely evolving into a massive break that could highlight a key person of interest, which then prompts the squad to regroup at the station, dig deep into background checks, and watch the entire puzzle slowly piece itself together. Therefore, reaching a critical stage where authorities actually executed a search warrant on two completely separate occasions is something that might genuinely go down again later this afternoon, or perhaps sometime tomorrow, or it might totally stall out for another couple of weeks, since it entirely hinges on the quality of the tip. Running down these clues is literally the bread and butter of how real detective work actually gets done around here. People wonder if there's any secret formula, but the boss puts it perfectly. We flesh out a solid tip, hunt it down aggressively, get the ball rolling, and before you know it, bam, we stumble onto something huge. Suddenly, we uncover some crazy baggage about a specific guy, which instantly bumps him up to a person of interest, or maybe even a prime suspect. So we keep digging deeper, he explained. The whole squad regroups back at the main war room to hash things out, pulling in the local prosecutors for some quick legal guidance while comparing notes with the federal agents and the rest of the task force. Ultimately, we march all that hard evidence right up to a judge, and they'll either give us the green light to raid the place or shut us down completely. The judge inks that paper, making it an official court directive, so pay close attention to this part. Long before a magistrate ever glances at that authorization and approves it, detectives have laid the groundwork and gathered substantial intel. Authorities had already proven clear probable cause, leading to two distinct authorizations for Luke Daly, one targeting his residence and another for his SUV. Yet this is exactly where the operational tactics take a fascinating turn. Law enforcement absolutely cannot hold a person hostage inside their own property during a raid unless they are formally taking them into custody, thanks to our constitutional rights. How did the detectives handle that? They bided their time until Daly and his 77-year-old mom pulled out of the driveway, immediately pulling them over. Pulling their vehicle over granted officers the legal leeway to hold them both while tactical teams tossed the residents. The second they hit the public street, the legal boundaries shifted, allowing authorities to detain both of them. Authorities collected DNA swabs and recorded their testimony before letting them walk free without any formal charges. Tossing the property on the 6200 block of North Placida Delio, barely 2 miles from where Nancy Guthrie lived, dragged on for several tedious hours. Detectives bagged numerous items, which the local sheriff confirmed are currently undergoing forensic testing while intentionally keeping all names strictly under wraps. They stayed silent that evening, the following morning, and for 5 straight days, bringing us to this exclusive Channel 12 broadcast. Our team successfully verified that a local Tucson man with a criminal record got held, interrogated, and ultimately let go during last week's massive sweep. Right now, his legal counsel is speaking out, fiercely rejecting any ties between his client and this incredibly high-profile kidnapping scandal. Channel 12 investigative reporter Sean Rice has chased down this federal angle for several days straight. So tell us what you uncovered, Sean. Honestly, the situation is wild because local Pima County deputies and federal agents absolutely refused to name any official suspects in the Nancy Guthrie mystery. I actually dedicated the past week trying to uncover the exact identity of the guy interrogated at that Catalina Foothills property last Friday. That was the exact moment task force members raided a specific property located a mere 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's front door. We can officially reveal that the guy sitting in the hot seat was 37-year-old Luke Daly. We just received a formal declaration from Daly's legal counsel, the same guy who handles several of his past court battles. Attorney Chris Scalpi stated on the record that his firm acknowledges Luke Daly faced 2 active warrants executed on February 13th, 2026. Both the client and his mother experienced temporary detainment by officers while the extensive property sweep took place. That particular press release somehow managed to verify the basic events while keeping us completely in the dark about the actual reasons behind them. Welcome to part 4, where we ask the real question: who exactly is Luke Daly? But first, a crucial legal warning. Before we dive in, let me be crystal clear. Authorities have neither arrested nor charged Luke Daly with anything regarding Nancy Guthrie vanishing. His lawyer adamantly denies any connection to the tragedy, so all the details I am sharing strictly originate from verified public dockets and press releases. Luke Daly is 37 years of age and calls Tucson, Arizona his permanent home. His defense is spearheaded by Chris Scalpi, a litigator who regularly handles his Pima County rap sheet. And that specific fact carries heavy weight here. He did not just randomly dial this guy in a sheer panic when federal agents knocked. Scalpi is his permanent legal representation. Keeping a defense lawyer on speed dial makes sense when you look at Daly's rap sheet, which our Channel 12 team pulled straight from court archives. Between 2019 and 2020, he spent 18 months locked up in a state penitentiary after a string of guilty verdicts. Those early charges included narcotics peddling, property destruction, and evading police, followed by another bust in 2022 for pushing illicit substances. The judge handed down 4 years of supervised release, but by early 2025, Marana cops busted him carrying a firearm and a stash of fentanyl. Despite his oversight officer pushing hard to revoke his freedom, the magistrate actually let him walk right back out into the community. Basically, by the time February 2026 rolled around and feds raided his place hunting for a missing person, his legal standing was incredibly precarious. Luke Daly was living out in the Catalina Foothills as a supervised felon who recently caught fresh heat for dangerous narcotics and an unlawful weapon. His legal representative issued a formal written response that goes exactly like this. The Scalpi firm acknowledges that their client found himself on the receiving end of 2 distinct raid orders issued on February 13th. Moving into 2026, officers temporarily held both the client and his elderly mother to secure the perimeter during the intensive property sweep. Law enforcement never placed either of them under formal arrest for this specific incident or any prior infractions. Our client shares absolutely zero ties with Nancy Guthrie and possesses completely nothing of value regarding her tragic abduction. Just like everyone else in Tucson, the family desperately prays for Nancy to make it home safe, making this an incredibly well-crafted piece of public relations. The lawyer admits the raids happened and acknowledges the temporary custody, but completely denies his client having any knowledge or involvement in the disappearance. However, that same press release completely skirts around why federal agents zeroed in on his client's exact house and ride for a major abduction probe. Honestly, when you dig into Luke Daly's past convictions, there is a massive hidden red flag that matters way more than just the rap sheet itself. Given his criminal history, Daly's genetic fingerprint is basically guaranteed to be sitting in the CODIS registry. That happens to be the exact same system where detectives entered the genetic material pulled from those dark gloves located 2 miles away from Nancy Guthrie's residence. Detectives would already have their answer if Daly's genetic markers paired up with the evidence on that glove. It speaks volumes that authorities have not slapped cuffs on anyone yet. However, striking out in the CODIS registry hardly means detectives have stopped looking his way. The system only pairs up genetic profiles, not the subtle breadcrumbs of circumstantial clues. It certainly cannot analyze security camera video. That database cannot process digital footprints, bank histories, or eyewitness testimonies, while the ongoing genetic genealogy investigation operates on a completely different wavelength. That specialized approach takes a lot more time, effectively snagging suspects who manage to slip right past the standard registry. Let us dive into the fifth act, exploring that crucial 2-mile zone. Take a good look at this next piece of information and just let it marinate in your mind for a second before we proceed. Think about Nancy Guthrie's property out in the Catalina Foothills of Tucson. Now factor in those dark gloves carrying a male genetic signature, discovered roughly 2 miles down the road from her house. Recall that widespread plea from federal agents asking regular folks to hand over their front porch camera videos. Authorities practically begged every single person living within a 2-mile bubble of Nancy's property to send in their security clips. Then you have Luke Daly's residence, located on the 6,200 block of North Placida de Roelio, sitting just about 2 miles away from the victim's doorstep. 3 distinct elements, all tied to that identical 2-mile stretch. I am absolutely not jumping to any wild conclusions here. What I am doing is sketching out the geographical reality. Detectives simply do not pull a 2-mile search zone out of thin air. That specific boundary lines up perfectly with what authorities consider a highly relevant distance, entirely driven by the tangible clues they have already bagged and tagged, like that crucial glove, or the biological material that turned up exactly 2 miles away from the crime scene, which suggests a potential path the perpetrator might have taken after leaving a specific house where they had to move the captive and then dump the incriminating items along the way. Where that glove was eventually dropped reveals a ton of geographical context regarding how far they ventured from the starting line. Sure, it might just be a random fluke that Luke Daly happens to reside a mere 2 miles away. The vast majority of folks living within that boundary are completely innocent and totally unconnected to this nightmare. Federal agents were requested surveillance clips from absolutely anyone situated within that 2-mile ring. They obviously were not pointing fingers at every single homeowner in the neighborhood. They were simply casting a wide net for intel. However, Luke Daly is hardly your average guy next door. He happens to be the sole local resident who had a pair of search warrants served simultaneously on his house and his ride. To date, he stands as the lone publicly identified figure in this whole ordeal whom undercover teams were actively tracking way before officers finally knocked on his door. Living inside that 2-mile bubble hardly proves he committed the crime, but it undeniably makes his location incredibly intriguing in an investigation that has been heavily driven by maps since the very beginning. Welcome to the 6th act, where we compare the sheriff's official statements against the defense lawyer's claim. As soon as headlines hit, the press revealing a male suspect had been taken into police custody and subsequently let go regarding the Nancy Guthrie mystery, reporters wasted absolutely no time throwing out the big question, has he been officially exonerated? Sheriff Chris Nanos definitely refrained from giving them a straightforward yes, pressed hard on whether Daly had been totally removed from the suspect list. Nanos deflected by asking the crowd, does this imply he is completely off our radar? Absolutely not, as we still have a job to finish. We are currently analyzing a pile of physical items pulled straight from that property. He emphasized that they had evidence to process from the home. You literally have the active head of law enforcement stating on national television that the raid on Luke Daly's residence yielded tangible items that crime lab technicians are actively testing right now. Now, take a second to compare that cautious rhetoric with how Nanos openly addressed the situation surrounding the Guthrie relatives. The moment internet sleuths started pointing fingers at her relatives, particularly Nancy's son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, the sheriff made the incredibly rare move of stepping up to the microphone to officially and explicitly clear the whole family of any wrongdoing. He vehemently labeled them as grieving victims. He slammed the swirling online rumors as utterly heartless. He actively bent over backwards to passionately defend the innocent folks who were closest to Nancy Guthrie in front of the entire world. Luke Daly has undeniably received zero such grace from the department. Not a single press release has been issued by the sheriff's squad declaring him innocent. You never heard them say, we checked him out and he is totally clean. All the public got was a vague confirmation that authorities engaged with a person of interest who complied with a judge's mandate and was ultimately let go. Being eventually let out the front doors of the station is vastly different from being stripped of the person of interest label. That absolutely does not equate to the authorities scratching his name off the suspect board. Sure, his defense lawyer insists his client has zero ties to this horrific crime. His legal counsel proclaims that narrative with absolute conviction and unwavering confidence. However, the top brass at the police department has avoided making any such definitive declarations in their official cop speak. There is an incredibly massive canyon of a difference between letting someone walk and officially clearing their name. The grieving Guthrie relatives were completely exonerated. Meanwhile, Luke Daly was merely permitted to leave the building. Those two legal statuses are worlds apart. Plus, in a high-profile manhunt garnering this much media frenzy, where the public dissects every single syllable uttered by the department, that glaring discrepancy is undoubtedly intentional. Welcome to the 7th act, where we zoom out to look at the broader landscape. Let us talk about Kayla Noel Day, that luxury SUV, and the emerging behavioral pattern. Hold on just a second, because I need to drop a crucial disclaimer before we dive any deeper. A portion of this upcoming breakdown contains wild internet rumors that remain totally unverified by official police channels. I want to be crystal clear that my platform absolutely refuses to invent links between people unless the authorities have explicitly stamped those connections as fact. Luke Daly simply happens to be the second officially named person of interest entangled in the tragic Nancy Guthrie puzzle. He is definitely not the lone wolf on their radar. Allow me to guide you through the crazy timeline that immediately preceded his dramatic detainment, because stringing these clues together reveals a fascinating investigative strategy that completely evaporates if you only hyper-focus on one isolated incident. On the night of February 12th, mere hours prior to the raid on Daly's place, the Tucson squad impounded a silver Range Rover straight out of a Culver's fast food parking lot. Right around that identical time frame, a local woman named Kayla Noel Day got scooped up at her own Tucson house just as the clock struck 11 at night. She faced a grueling interrogation before ultimately walking free. Fast forward to February 13th, the day of the massive Daly takedown. Detectives executed a pair of heavy-duty warrants, tearing through both his mother's property and his personal luxury vehicle. Authorities brought him and his mother in, collected some physical evidence, and then let them walk without filing charges. At an earlier stage of this probe, a guy who initially introduced himself as Carlos, later confirmed to be Carlos Palacios, got pulled over down in Rio Rico. That spot sits roughly 30 minutes south of Tucson, right by the Mexican border. Cops held him, asked a few questions, and then cut him loose. We are looking at 3 distinct individuals in 3 completely different spots spread across the greater Tucson metro area. Every single one of them was held, grilled for information, and set free. Yet not one has been locked up or officially ruled out as a suspect. The internet is currently buzzing with rumors linking Kayla Noel Day and Luke Daly to a massive federal narcotics trafficking bust out of Tucson back in 2025. The authorities have absolutely not backed this up, so I am certainly not presenting this link as an undeniable truth. However, I will point out that looking at Daly's prior rap sheet, which involves pushing narcotics like fentanyl and unlawful weapons charges, definitely makes you wonder what sort of underworld web detectives are currently untangling right next to this abduction mystery, snatching someone strictly for a serious payday, especially the sort that involves leaving demand letters behind and demanding digital currency drops into specific crypto wallets, is precisely the flavor of illegal activity that bleeds right into highly organized syndicate operations. Plus, Tucson is way more than just another town in the desert. It is positioned roughly 60 miles from the Mexican boundary, dropping it straight into one of the busiest narcotics pipelines in the entire country. Federal agents have actually already tapped their counterparts down in Mexico to help out with this ongoing situation, which is not necessarily because they have concrete proof that Nancy got smuggled out of the country, but simply because they just cannot dismiss the very real possibility that the perpetrators have deep ties crossing international lines. That is a massive detail. At the end of the day, our biggest blind spot right now is simply all the hidden facts we are still totally missing. If you live near a missing person case, submit your security footage to law enforcement without waiting to be asked. A task force of 300 officers and over 40,000 public tips proved that communities can move mountains when they act together. The 1,988 abduction of Annie Laurie Harren went unsolved for years, but modern DNA tools and genealogy science have changed everything. Today, investigators have tools that past generations could only dream of: genetic genealogy, smart cameras, real-time tip networks. No tip is too small. A description, a license plate, a memory. These details have cracked cases just like this one before. If you have information about Nancy Guthrie, contact the Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900 or the Federal Tip Hotline. A reward of over $200,000 is waiting for the lead that brings her home. Your voice could be the one that matters most. Nancy Guthrie is someone's mother, someone's grandmother, and somewhere out there, the truth is waiting to be found. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, was taken from her own home in the middle of the night, and the world is still searching for answers. She lived alone in a wealthy, peaceful neighborhood, the kind of place where danger feels impossible. Her security camera was deliberately disabled at 1:47 a.m., not a glitch, but an act of calculated sabotage. When she missed her Sunday church service, the people who loved her knew something was terribly wrong. A disguised figure had approached her property in darkness, prepared, patient, and entirely hidden from view. The evidence left behind told investigators one chilling truth: this was not an accident. Someone had planned this. Predators do not always come from nowhere. They watch, they wait, and they choose their moment. If you notice anything unusual around a neighbor's home, unfamiliar vehicles, tampered cameras, strange activity, speak up. Elderly individuals living alone are among the most vulnerable in our communities. Check on them regularly. Investigators recovered a critical piece of evidence just 2 miles from the scene. Your porch camera could be the next breakthrough.